Good morning, and thank you all for being here. Today we'll be using the reverse ranking technique to explore the effectiveness of various measures to prevent acts of terrorism at the train station in our jurisdiction. The reverse ranking technique is typically used following an analysis or brainstorming session to rank the resulting solution from that session from least helpful to most helpful. And by doing this, it forces us to consider the negative factors for each alternative instead of just the positive factors. This technique is useful because oftentimes the solution with the most positive effects or impacts may actually also possess the most negative effects as well. And by considering these negative effects of each alternative, it allows us to eliminate the alternatives with the worst negative effects. So there are three main steps in this technique. The first is to list all possible solutions. The second is to identify and consider negative impacts of each solution. And then third, we'll rank the solutions in order from least helpful to most helpful. So as I mentioned before, today we are considering ways to prevent acts of terrorism at a train station in our jurisdiction. And today we have you two, our security experts, to provide expert insight into this analysis. So thank you again for being here. So yesterday, when we met, we all came up with various solutions addressing terrorism prevention at the station. And step one in the technique is just to list what we came up with, which I've done on the board right here. So now we can move to step two, when we actually go through and start identifying some of the negative impacts associated with each one of these solutions we've come up with. So the first one we talked about was establishing a constant security, a visible security detail of armed guards at the station that would basically patrol the station and be available to respond to any reports of suspicious activity or even detect the activity themselves. So what are some of the negative impacts of this solution?
I think funding could be a negative aspect of it because you need to hire, you need to train, and then you also need to pay for arming special security guards.
I think there's also a high chance to make the public uneasy at the sight of security guards, especially if they're more heavily armed.
Mm-hmm. And there's also a lot of time involved in training new security guards.
So the next one we talked about was the possibility of installing sophisticated surveillance systems and equipment including cameras, closed-circuit television, that kind of thing, as well as sensors that could detect any substances that are related to chemical, biological, or explosive threats. So what are some of the negatives that you could think of for this?
Again, I think funding could be an issue. You're going to have to pay for all this equipment, and that could be very expensive.
And as before, there's also potential for public uneasiness with a lack of privacy, as well as all the sensors.
Right.
And surveillance systems have not necessarily been proven to deter terrorists.
So another one of the options that came up was utilizing increased signage, videos, things like public announcements to actually engage the passengers themselves and the public to increase their awareness about any suspicious packages or suspicious behavior that could be taking place in the station, really in order to create a more vigilant and aware public.
Okay.
So what are some things we can think of for this one?
I think we have an increased chance of false alarms. A lot of this one relies on largely untrained security services.
All right, any others for this one?
I think that's about it.
Okay. So another one of the options we talked about was deploying canine units at random intervals to create a visual display of security and also randomly searching passengers or other people in the station. So what other negatives can you think of for this one?
I think the public could be alarmed over a sudden security presence that could show up, especially when you're deploying a canine unit and doing random searches.
I think you're also at risk for a lack of security when those units aren't deployed at the station.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on. Another solution that we thought of was actually carrying out background investigations on every passenger prior to their travel date. So what are some of the negative impacts that could be associated with this?
I think that it could be very expensive of pursuing background checks for every single passenger. And there's also a lot of time involved in that too.
Okay.
I think it's possible that the public perception of that time and money being wasted could also be a negative factor.
Okay.
People may have difficulty booking their travel plans because they have to go through that background investigation first.
You could have riders that aren't cleared to travel, which means reduced ridership, and that could lead to reduced revenues as well.
Okay, any other ideas for this one?
I think that's about it.
All right. Another additional solution that came up was allowing only ticketed passengers to actually enter into the train station.
So this could be really inconvenient for friends or families that are going to the station to pick up arriving passengers because they can't actually wait for them in the station.
Mm-hmm.
And that could lead to people congregating outside of the train stations, waiting for departures and arrivals.
Okay.
I also don't think that this is it's not really an effective method at stopping a terrorist from entering the station, because a terrorist could just buy a ticket.
Right.
And I think there's a chance for loss of revenue with any kind of commerce in the train station, businesses, shops.
And then the last solution we came up with was the installation of X-ray machines or metal detectors at all entrances and access points to the train station.
Okay. I think a negative aspect for this is, again, the cost. X-ray machines and metal detectors can be really expensive to purchase, but then also to install and to run.
I think people could also see their rights being infringed on, and we see that a lot now with the higher technology machines,
Right.
and being a little invasive.
Yeah.
Okay.
There'd be an increase in time spent by passengers waiting in line to enter the station.
Okay.
And I think that all of these could lead to people maybe taking other options.
Right.
Could decrease your ridership.
And then that could also lead to loss in revenue.
Right.
Because you have a less efficient transit system.
Mm-hmm. So we've completed listing all the negative aspects of each one of our solutions. Okay, now, so moving to step 3, we need to rank the solutions from least helpful to most helpful based on the number of downsides associated with each one of the solutions we came up with. So to help us just see that, I'm going to tally up really quickly how many we put for each solution. So it looks like for the first one we have 3. The second one, the surveillance systems, is also 3. The signage, the public engagement, is just 1. The deployment of canines at random is 2. The use of background investigations looks like 6. The admission of ticketed passengers into this station is 4. And then the installation of the X-ray metal detector equipment, that looks like we have 5. Okay, so based on these numbers, it looks like the use of the background investigations would go at the top of our list, given that it has the most, it has 6 negative aspects associated with it. Okay. So for the second one, as you can see, the installation of X-ray metal detectors, we have 5 negative aspects for that. So you think that should go next?
Yeah.
Okay. And now moving on, the admission of only ticketed passengers into the station, we came up with 4 negative aspects for that. So do we agree it can go next on the list?
Yes, sir.
So next we have these 2 solutions that we came up with, the constant visible presence of armed security guards, and then also the surveillance systems and sensors. They both, as you can see, have 3 negative aspects associated with them. So we need to come up with a way really to break this tie for our purposes. So what else could we consider to help us rank these 2?
Well, since both options are going to be expensive to implement, I think surveillance systems should probably go a little higher on the list because they aren't necessarily a proven deterrent for terrorism, whereas armed guards are.
I'd agree with that.
So that'll be followed with the armed guards. Okay, so moving on, we have just 2 left. The next one is the deployment of canines at random in random searches, which we identified having 2 negative aspects. Do we agree that can go next?
Yep.
All right, and the last solution left that we haven't ranked is the use of signage, videos, and announcements to actively engage the public in detecting suspicious activity. So we only identified 1 negative aspect for this, so that will go at the bottom of our list. So having identified the signage and communication with the public solution as having the fewest negative impacts, we can use this information to really better plan how to allocate resources when trying to improve security for the train station. And in reality, our jurisdiction could implement more than one of these measures if resources permit. So hopefully this technique helped to shed some light on the negative aspects of solutions that otherwise may not have become apparent. So that concludes the reverse ranking exercise, and thank you again for participating today.
Thank you.